Again, my apologies for being late. Meetings at work, they ran over. Good problems to have. The construction industry is very busy. So we're going to get started. We'll call roll. My name's Sean Hutchinson. Vice Chairman Jeff Nelson.
Present.
Secretary Jay Adluski.
Present.
Member Brian Patterson. Brian's not here? Nope. Oh, yeah, I guess he's not. Member Linda Grice.
Present.
Okay. Member Clay Alsop.
Present.
Member Joanna Condi. Present. And we still have a vacancy in the alternate member. So we will dispense of the opening statement, and we will call for speaker request forms. If you are a member of the public and would like to speak on any matter brought before us, please fill out a speaker request form wherever they are and hand them to the planning assistant at the end of the table. We'll get started tonight with the consent agenda. We have on the consent agenda 2 items. That is the minutes, discussion and possible action to approve the minutes of the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting held on September 20th, 2018, and item 2C, Fairmont Village Assisted Living Center conditional use permit. It's a request to obtain a conditional use permit to allow an assisted living center / senior care facility within the existing building. The site is located at 10401 North 79th Avenue and zoned intermediate commercial C2. Do we have a motion on the consent agenda?
Chairman, I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Okay, we have a motion
I'll second that.
and a second. Is there anything under discussion on the consent agenda? Seeing none, since we don't have our voting buttons, we are going to take a roll call vote. We'll start at the end of the dais. We'll start with you, Commissioner Condi.
Okay, Joanna Conde, votes aye.
Okay.
Jeff Nelson votes aye.
Jay?
Jay Atluski votes yes.
Clay Alsop, yes.
Linda Grice, yes.
And I vote yes as well. Okay, so the consent agenda is passed. That brings us to new business. We have 2 items on new business. 3R, outdoor dining, zoning ordinance text amendment. Request to consider a city-initiated amendment to Section 21503 Land Use Matrix and Section 21-505.B3 Limitations on Uses within the non-residential section of the City of Peoria zoning ordinance. The proposed changes would amend the current limitations on outdoor dining to only require a conditional use permit if the exterior walls of the patio or the outdoor dining area are within 200 feet of a residentially zoned property. Staff, you have a report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. I'll make the presentation tonight. So tonight, item 3R, this is a city-initiated amendment to the zoning ordinance pertaining to outdoor dining patios and seating areas. So what I'll do in this presentation is I'll give you an update as to the genesis of this regulation that we've had in the code, our experience since that time, and the basis for why we are seeking adjustments to that part of the code. As you know, zoning code amendments can be a request from any party, whether a private party or city party. Typically, it's the city that submits amendments to the zoning code. Oftentimes, we're reacting to either a Supreme Court case that might have come out or a legislative mandate, or we might be trying to provide some clarification of the code. In this instance, we've had some experience with this provision over a period of 12 years. I'll talk a little bit about the history. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to strike a regulatory balance. This is a regulation that is in place to protect the neighborhoods that are in close proximity to an outdoor dining patio, but we're also recognize that outdoor dining areas provide a certain level of community vitality. They activate public spaces, and they're important in a community. So we want to make sure we strike an appropriate balance between trying to provide that vitality and also protecting the neighborhood. Okay, so this amendment goes back to 2006, and the way the ordinance reads today, you see these amendments you see these conditional use permits that come forward to the commission, and essentially any outdoor dining or seating patio in the city is required to get issuance of a conditional use permit. It comes to the commission for a decision. If it's appealed, it goes to city council. And so the genesis of that is back in 2006, we had one specific patio that was in close proximity to a single family neighborhood. I won't mention the tenant, but there was a lot of interaction between the tenants or the patrons of that space and some of the nearby residences. And so it escalated quite a bit. The city got quite a bit of complaints on that. And so the directive at the time from city council was to pursue some type of change that's provide all these outdoor dining patios under closer review so we can make sure that they're compatible. And in providing a allowance for a conditional use permit, that essentially allows the staff and the commission the ability to limit hours of operation depending on its proximity, its context. We could certainly limit the activity that occurs in the outdoor dining patio, siting, or we could offer adjustments to mitigate some of those concerns like enhanced landscaping or walls or those types of treatments. So that was the purpose of the conditional use permit. And again, since 2006, we've processed 48 conditional use permits. So there's been 48 outdoor dining patios that have come into the city. And we get these, and we send postcards out to see if there's public interest into them. And I can report that in that time period, in the last 12 years, all of them, except for 2 of them, did not have any public interest, meaning we didn't get any calls, we didn't get any emails, there was no letters of opposition. So in most cases, there was no citizen interest on those conditional use permits. We did have 2 of them, though, that did generate some interest, and in some case, some opposition was revealed. So we went back and looked at those cases that generated public interest. Well, unsurprisingly, they happened to be cases where patios were in close proximity to single family. So that's going to be the basis of our adjustment tonight. Essentially, so what this graphic tries to identify is on the left, these are the existing standards as they exist today in the zoning code, and to the right is the proposed standards. So if we go through each element, again, today, all patios have to go through have to receive a conditional use permit to operate. What we're proposing is, we're saying that if you're a patio within 200 feet of a residentially zoned lot, you would be required to go through the conditional use permit process. Otherwise, we're suggesting that you're outside of the impact area, and therefore, it would be a permitted ancillary part of whatever business was coming in. So that's the main change. The secondary change is, you might recall that currently we limit patios to 25% of the gross floor area of the establishment. And I think through the commission, we've seen a couple instances where the applicant has asked for a waiver from that to a different percentage. What we're recommending is that we eliminate that percentage. We think that percentage is perhaps arbitrary. We think that the size of the patio would be dictated and limited anyway by the amount of parking that's available on site or about the market dynamics. If the patio is too big and they don't think it can work, I think it'll self-correct in some way. So we're recommending that there be no maximum percentage to the size of the patio. And then the third provision, it says, for conditional use permits, the Planning and Zoning Commission can impose a menu of limitations. That's not going to change if the patio is within 200 feet and we still require a conditional use permit. We will still have the option to consider those limitations to the patio. So I wanted to show you a couple of examples to illustrate the change that we're talking about. So this happens to be an example at 83rd and Bell Road. I'm pointing to the In-N-Out Burger on the corner. So there's an outdoor dining and seating patio. You know, when you drive out there in that context, you are hundreds of feet away from the residential, not likely to have any impact on any residential area or any adjacent property. So we're saying in this instance, because it's hundreds of feet away, it won't have any appreciable impact. We're suggesting a conditional use permit isn't necessary in that venue. Here's another impact. Here's another example. So here we have a patio. It happens to be within 200 feet of residential. You can see the context of the patio and its proximity to residential. We're suggesting there's a possibility that it could have an impact. It could be related to how late the patio is staying open. Is there music on the patio that could cause some concerns with noise or debris left around there? So we're suggesting that in that type of context where it is close, that a conditional use permit would still be warranted. I should also mention too that the 200-foot line that we're suggesting tonight is consistent with our current provision for requiring a conditional use permit for fast food restaurants, for example. That aligns with that provision. It also aligns with the provision where we require a bar or tavern to be at least 200 feet from residential. So there is some symmetry with those parts in the code as well. Now, tonight, I passed out a memo and a revised, some revised language for you. So I wanted to talk through with that for you. What that has to relate to really is how we measure the distance from the outdoor dining patio to the lot. So if you were to look at the language that we provided to the commission that's in your packet, what it says is that essentially if the patio is within 200 feet of a residentially zoned boundary, then it would require a conditional use permit. So if I can first direct your attention to the part on the left, just to let you know that when we look at our residential zoning districts, the residential zoning line actually goes to the center line of the street. So in this example at Lake Pleasant Parkway and Lake Pleasant Road, it's where the Walmart Center is. You can see the area in orange. The zoning boundary actually extends to the center line of that arterial. Now, arguably, you've got a patio that is separated from the residential lot by 4 to 6 lanes of traffic, a very busy arterial, and quite a bit of separation. So if we used what we had provided to you in the packet of the boundary, this circumstance, which we don't think would have an impact, would require a conditional use permit because it would only be about 130 feet. What we're suggesting is that the language be altered to be 200 feet from a residentially zoned lot. So what that removes is the public right-of-way, and it removes any common areas like landscape buffers or utility tracks that are not residential lots. So in this instance, it would be 275 feet from the nearest residential lot. So we're suggesting, we're proposing that that language be adjusted to refer to residentially zoned lot. So that's the purpose of that memo and that part of the in the code, our provision that we've provided to you. Finally, in terms of our findings, we believe that this amendment is necessary. It streamlines the outdoor dining process for businesses. It makes it, there's a closer tie between the impact and the necessity for a conditional use permit, and it will continue to protect neighborhoods, but also provide for the ability for businesses to have an outdoor dining patio perhaps without going through the conditional use permit process. So with that, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we recommend approval of this case to the Peoria City Council. And with that, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take it.
Okay, before we open the public hearing, is this a public hearing. Okay, so before we open the public hearing, is there any comments from Commission? Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you, Chairman. Chris, can you talk to us a little bit about that 200-foot? What was the determining factor? I'm sure it wasn't arbitrary. There must have been some reason why we make the cutoff 200 feet. Do we know why we chose 200 feet?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Nelson, great question. A couple things we looked at. One was the alignment between other provisions in the code. We thought it was important to be consistent with other provisions we made. I mentioned fast food restaurants with the speaker boxes particularly, and the sound, traveling the sound, and also the tavern or bar. We thought it was important to be consistent with those. When we think about 200 feet, that's about 10 car lengths, and we think that's an appropriate separation whereby noise is not likely to continue and impact those areas beyond that. So that's the basis of that.
Okay, so it's based on existing language we have.
Correct.
Okay, and we believe that existing language is based on sound studies or some kind of scientific evidence that says that the sound drops off pretty significantly after 200 feet?
Commissioner Nelson, I can tell you that when we identified the 200-foot for the fast food restaurant text amendment that we did, I want to say 5-6 years ago, that was a consideration. That's how we identified the 200-foot limit there. That we looked at the travel distance of sound from the speaker boxes, and 200 feet was a reasonable number there.
Okay. Well, that seems to make sense. My second question would be, I'm totally on board. That makes sense to me. Lifting now the patio size. So in theory, you could have a patio larger than the interior space of an establishment, right? If there's no max. A larger patio equals bigger crowds, equals bigger noise, equals, is that 200 foot out the door? Should we be looking at separating these out and seeing how the 200 feet works first before we now expand the patio area and create possibly more noise? Or I'm curious your thoughts on that, because that one bothers me a little bit.
Okay, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Nelson, that's certainly a provision that the commission could decide to leave in, and let's see how the 200-foot goes. We just thought the patios that we've seen that have come in, generally they're around 25. Sometimes they range from 25 to 50% of it, and we thought that the 25% maybe seemed a little arbitrary, and we're trying to activate these public spaces here, and there were other types of limiters, but certainly if that was something that was important to the commission to leave in, we could do that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if it potentially makes more sense to do this in stages, where we do the 200 feet, identify if there's any potential issues, and after a year or two, potentially, they could add that next piece in about expanding the patio size. So,
Mr. Chair, Commissioner
going through
Nelson,
my
certainly if we left that provision in, if the applicant had a patio that was beyond that, they certainly have the ability to ask for a waiver and then come before the commission
oh, I see.
to determine that.
Right, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I think personally, I think I'm more concerned about the proximity to the properties than the restricting of the percentage. I don't think that we should be, if it's a good fit, I don't see why we have to limit it to such a small percentage of the property. I am, though, concerned, just like Commissioner Nelson said, about that, having a little bit of oversight about the proximity to neighborhoods, especially if no conditional use permit is needed. Are you talking about having a bar with bands playing on an outdoor patio and 200 feet when a band's playing at 10 at night? That they might be, they might as well be in your backyard. So I mean, that's kind of where I would be, is maybe less restriction on the percentage, but still oversight on the proximity to the houses. That's just my take on it. So I guess not really a question. Any other questions? Commissioner Condi?
I think that, you did a study with the fast food, but a fast food drive-through where they're taking orders is different than a band playing at night on an open patio. It's a different decibel level, I would imagine. And I think that is a greater impact. Just to, echo what you were saying. I'm not worried about the size of the patio because I think it's an economic viability there that the establishment would have to discuss, because there's so many months that the patio then would just be wasted space because it's too hot to sit out. So, but I wish I had more information about what is typical for other cities that have it, or for other areas where they do have to confront large, I'm thinking of a couple of places where they have outdoor bands, and it does get very noisy, and the sound does travel.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Condi, I believe, we could certainly do some research, but I believe that we're unique in our requirement for a conditional use permit for a outdoor dining patio. I will say that we, along with other cities, we do have a noise ordinance. Depending on the time of day of the property, there is a decibel limit that any use would have to keep themselves at.
That would alleviate. I had forgotten, of course, you do have a noise ordinance, so somebody, if it gets too loud, somebody could complain and, okay, got it.
Okay, Commissioner Alsop. You were gonna-
Yeah, Chris pulled the wind out of my sail. I was going to say we have a noise ordinance, and as long as we have some sort of enforceability on somebody that's making a lot of noise pollution, I have no reservations about this, knowing that there are noise ordinances in place to protect the neighbors.
I think, I'm sorry, yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Gray.
My question pertains to the memo that you put in front of us this evening. The revision language, I'm having a little trouble with the way it reads. It sounds like to me that it's negating the need for a conditional use permit if it's within 200 feet.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Grice, all we're trying to do is ensure that the 200-foot separation is from a actual occupied residential lot or residential lot there. And so just looking at the way our code language reads, we know that zoning boundaries go to the center line of the street. In this example that I was trying to provide, you would have a circumstance that arguably maybe did not have an impact because of the width of the roadway, Lake Pleasant Parkway, and all the traveling, all the traffic there, that perhaps we didn't unduly require them to go through a conditional use permit when it had the separation of a street there. So we're trying to clean up the code language to accomplish that objective.
Yeah, I think it is a misprint there,
Yeah, it
Chris.
is a misprint.
Oh, is it a misprint?
Yeah, you have within.
Oh, we meant beyond. Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Adam. Does that clarify that?
Right, if it's, the word is beyond instead of within,
Yes.
I'm all in.
Okay.
Eagle Eye Linda, nice job.
I think, and I, you know, won't say the name of the area that I believe that the issue has been in the past, but that was, you know, all of the noise ordinances were in place, yet we still had enormous issue with the one particular venue, if I'm thinking about the same place that you guys are. And there was real problems there for the you know, the neighboring communities. And I mean, they received a conditional use permit to do what they were doing. And, you know, so it doesn't prove that just because we have that process in place, we're going to protect 100% the surrounding community. So, yeah, interesting conversation. Is there any other questions for staff before I open the public hearing?
Yeah, just one.
Okay.
So, you know, in thinking through this and listening to, you know, my committee members here, 200 feet with a band outside is loud, 300 feet with a band outside is loud, 400 feet potentially is loud. Is there a way that we could require that use permit if there's to be live music on the patio, which would then allow the vast majority of businesses to come in and not need it, but if they wanted to put a band outside, I mean, I'm thinking out loud here if that might be a good way to go, if that solves some issues.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Otluski, that could certainly be another provision we could provide, and if that's something that the commission's interested in us drawing up, we could certainly draw that up and bring that back to the commission for your consideration.
Okay. Commissioner Condi?
That seems like a real hassle. Is that, I'm getting the impression that this is to alleviate the hassle of businesses from having to come in and apply for something that under most circumstances is going to be a problem. And that even under any regulations, there's always an outlier that can be a problem. And because of the noise level, you can, you know, restrict it that way. But otherwise, there hasn't really been any. From what you said, there's only been 2 issues that have come up in 12 years.
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Well, let me, okay, I'm going to go ahead and open a public hearing. And any members of the public wish to speak? Seeing none? I guess we close the public hearing. All right, now we get that out of the way. So, just, what has the impact been on the city for having this process in place? Have we impacted businesses? Have we made a tremendous impact on just, you know, having a little bit of oversight on having this process in place?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the impact would only be the additional 2 to 3 months that would require for a business to go through a process to get a use permit. And what we've seen a lot of times is a lot of these cases, it happens to be could be a Burger King or Starbucks with a few chairs or a little patio in the middle of a big shopping center, and they have to go through a process to get that patio approved. So in most circumstances, we haven't found patios to be in close proximity, or they already have the suites that kind of envelop the patio, so they're not directly adjacent to the residential area. Like I'd mentioned, we've had 2 cases in the last 12 years that have generated interest.
All right. Okay. So are we taking action on this tonight? Is that the?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we are recommending a action tonight, unless the commission wanted us to go back and consider some other provisions.
Okay, well, what's the pleasure of the commission?
Mr. Chair? Oh, you-
Yeah, Commissioner Alsop?
I'm comfortable with the ordinance as presented. I'm open to other comments, so, but I'm comfortable with what I see and what I've heard here.
If you'd like to make a motion, we can have a motion in a second, we can have further discussion.
I motion that we approve, what's item 3R as presented.
Okay. Up to
Second?
it. Second, okay. Anything further on discussion? Commissioner Condi? No? Okay. We have a motion and a second. All right, so we'll go ahead and vote. Why don't we start on this end of the table, Commissioner Grice?
Linda Grice, yes.
Clay Alsop, yes.
Jay Atlowski, yes.
Jeff Nelson, yes.
Joanna Conde, yes.
Sean Hutchinson, yes. Okay, passes unanimous. Just keep a good handle on these, on the riffraff that hangs out of these patios. Okay, we're on a, sorry, it's been a long day. This has been a very, I think it is me. It's been a long, long day. All right, let's move on. Item 4R, we have a project update, 2018 major plan amendment, staff presentation, possible discussion regarding 2018 major plan amendment cycle. Lori Beaver, yeah, has to be Lori.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, yes, I am back before you once again to provide an update on our efforts to update the general plan. So as you know, we've been going through our comprehensive update called Plan Peoria AZ for a little bit of time now. And for members of our public who will be seeing this possibly later on online, just a little bit of background for them. So the general plan's role is to guide the growth and the development over the next 10, 20 years and beyond. And it impacts all aspects of the city, from our city leaders all the way down to staff, mom and pops, business leaders, everything in between. They are impacted by the vision that's provided within the general plan. And we are unique that we need to go out to the voters every 10 years to get this plan updated. So Plan Peoria AZ has been a comprehensive rewrite effort, and when we started this, the public outreach and the comments that we've received, absolutely phenomenal. And because of that, and because when we were looking at our maps and what state they were in the text, we decided to break this up into a multi-year project. So what we're trying to do is to create the most responsive plan possible going forward, and because of that, we're breaking it down into a couple different tasks, if you will. The 2018 Major General Plan cycle is a cleanup effort of trying to get our land use or circulation plan and some of our text up to date so that we have a good framework going forward. The sole purpose is to get our maps and our text to recognize existing conditions and our future needs. And so it really is the basis for going forward and continuing for the full rewrite. Once we're done with the major amendment this cycle, we're still not done. We're back at it. We're continuing on. We're looking at going back forward through this process through the 2019. That's going to be a brand new document, start to finish, coming back forward, going out to public comment yet again, being presented in front of Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council for consideration. So really this is just to get this, what we're presenting tonight is just an update as to where we're at to get things kind of base level where we can work from. So we're hoping to go forward in 2020 on the ballot, and that will be taking a lot of hard work at that point in time. So we're looking to go out to 2020 on the ballot. So in terms of the 3 amendments that we're proposing this year, first one is the circulation map. What the map actually does is shows the existing and the envisioned transportation network for the entire city. It's different than what we call the street classification map. What this actually does is show what we call collectors, arterials, and above. It doesn't define major or minor. That's what occurs on the street classification map. So this year's amendments, we were looking at refining some classifications, kind of recognizing what was actually built on the ground, needed to match up with what we showed on the map. We had some additions, some subtractions on there. A couple of them got renamed. if you remember the White Peaks, the haciendas at White Peaks, we had an area in there that we're proposing a name change because it was kind of off alignment and it was suited to another name. And we're also doing some realignments based on topography. Our second one is the one that I think our director is the most happiest about, which is providing specificity to our land use map. And it does look like a wide range of crayons kind of thrown together on the map, but those colors actually mean something to us. And it provides direction in terms of if it's residential, commercial, industrial, what does that property want to be when it grows up, so to speak. We do cover 250 square miles within our municipal planning area, and that's a little different than what's within our city limits. So we actually go above and beyond. We include Maricopa County. We're also in Yavapai as well. So proposed modifications this year is to recognize existing conditions, and I'll give you a wonderful example coming up. So it's essentially a general cleanup of line work. We didn't go in and touch vacant sites or areas for refinement. That really is left for next year's cycle when we start talking, continuing the conversation with the stakeholders and start repositioning properties as they need to be. So this is largely recognizing existing conditions as they are today. So what does that mean? On the left, you see is kind of our before. We've got water kind of over the top of homes. We've got some park spaces over homes kind of scattered throughout. And what we would call our low-density residential land use category on top of a hill and kind of varying throughout. So the line work was pretty general. It's time to make it cleaned up and kind of match with reality. So what you see on the right has been cleaned up. The water recognizes FEMA floodplain, floodway limitations. Our open space is where it should be, and our low-density residential categories are kind of lined up with where the homes are. So it doesn't seem like much, but when you do 250 square miles, it becomes kind of a time-consuming process. So a labor of love, if you will. The third one being presented or being proposed is changes to our land use element, which is Chapter 2, and we also have some changes proposed to Chapter 14, which is our plan administration. Specifically in Chapter 2, we are recognizing waterways for the first time. We've had that category on the map, as you saw, for quite a while, but we're formally recognizing it this year and giving it its own name. The other one that we're modifying the mixed-use category to allow additional flexibility. We had a requirement for the amount of residential and the amount of commercial on there. What we're finding is the market provides us the best information as to what's suitable on those particular sites. In the Chapter 14, we're clarifying the major and the minor amendment language. So that's just one refinement this year. Again, when we do the comprehensive amendment, we're going back from start to finish and we're opening up the whole thing for discussion. But we're recommending this tweak this year. So for public outreach, like I said, we've received significant public outreach to date, and this is in the major general plan amendment cycle. And so state statute dictates the process, if you will. And there's something called the 60-day review. And typically, you would transmit the packet of materials to local, state, and federal agencies. You ask for their comments. They have 60 days to provide comments back to you, and then you move forward. We went a step further than that this year. We opened it up for public comment as well. We posted it on the website. We reached out and did social media. We even did 2 open houses where we invited the public to come out and talk to us if they had questions on the changes. And we have received public comment, both on the agency side and both from the resident side. So typically, we would not have public comments in this situation, but again, our residents are providing us valuable feedback. And so we will be sharing the extent to the comments that we received as this goes forward to public hearing. So, like I said, we have received comment. In a very scientific manner, we've created an errata sheet, if you will. We've kept track of all the comments that we have received to date. Some of those do impact the amendments that we will be taking forward, and so because of that, we will be making changes to some of the mapping and some of the text. Some of those comments are more appropriate for the comprehensive update in 2019, so we're kind of tabling those comments for now and compiling, kind of putting them on the side to be picked up when we go back through the start to finish on that one. So today is October 4th. Our review date is October 8th, so final comments to come in, we do ask by October 8th. After that, staff is going to be making some last-minute refinements going forward. You'll see updated maps, and I'll kind of talk about maps and changes November 1st when we do that. So in addition to public comment, we have been reaching out to our stakeholders. They have provided comments as well. So we are continuing the dialogue. What I do want to relay is after October 8th, we are still taking public comment. So at any point in time, we are still taking public comment. We do have a cutoff, though, in order to incorporate those comments into the maps that you see for packet purposes on that one. So next steps for tonight, this is a discussion-only informational meeting. Our 60-day review period ends October 8th. That would be Monday. We are coming back for Planning and Zoning Commission. Hearing number 1, we are required to have 2. Hearing number 1 is November 1st. We will be off-site. We are required by state law to be off-site, so that will be at a different location. That will be for discussion only. We'll take public testimony. I'll outline the cases, and if there's any public comment, we'll take that at that point in time. Second, we'll go to hearing number 2, as you see, November 15th, at which point I will be asking for the commission to make a recommendation on the amendments to provide to City Council. We are required to hear the amendments in the same calendar year, so they go to the last hearing for City Council, which would be December 4th, where they get to consider those. So one last plug. For our viewing public when they do see this. We do ask for comments if they have them. There are options to either download the information on both websites. We do have hard copies for viewing, and they have my contact information to get a hold of me. So with that, any questions?
Okay, any questions for Lori? Commissioner Nelson?
Thank you for that report. Very interesting. Can't wait to hear what the public comments are. I'm curious on that topic of public comments. What has been the level of engagement from the public?
Chairman, Commissioner Nelson, surprisingly, it has been good for a major general plan amendment. Typically, these do not receive as much interest as other amendments when you're going through a normal cycle. We've made it a point to go above and beyond what would typically be required just for state statute. And so we had low expectations going forward. We had 7 members of the public at one meeting, which is unheard of. And we had
I believe that.
I mean, we weren't expecting anybody. We had 7, and I will give a plug out to our PLI, because the folks that are attending PLI, they come with a sense of interest, and so that's where we received the most public interest from, is for those residents. They decided to stop in and kind of engage further from that process. We've also gotten emails from residents as well. So it's exceeded our expectations this year, which isn't a bad thing, because we always welcome the
Very
comments.
encouraging. Great, thank you.
Commissioner Condi?
Could you go back to the map you showed at the very beginning? And I'm probably way off topic, but I was curious. A lot of times things are done, when the first general plan was done, when I was involved like 25 years ago or whatever it was, we didn't have any of the technology we have now. And even 10 years ago, we didn't. And I'm curious to know if there was use of drones or any aerial pictures or anything to say, oh, wait a second, we put one over the other and this isn't fitting. And I know it's an off-the-wall question, but I was just interested if if that is being used to compare what is on an old map compared to what actually is.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Condi, so I'm going to go back to this particular map right here because it's a good example. We did not use drones. We're not quite that advanced. That would be really kind of cool. But what we did is staff time. Imagine these as an 11 by 17. There were 250 of them. We had it broken down into various parts of the city. And staff went parcel by parcel, if you will, to go through line work to get it corrected. So in some cases, it was painstaking detail, a lot of zooming in, zooming out, some corrections here and there. So this was a lot of legwork.
Okay, I was just curious, 'cause I thought, looking at that, that would be a really interesting use of having a drone go up and take the pictures and then superimpose them on the map to see what actually was for those places that have been built. I don't know, it's just something I was curious.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Condi, if I might, that's a great comment. That's actually what we do when we look at our general plan map. We have layers of information, whether it's topography, sensitive areas, wash corridors, cultural sites. So we look at all that information and determine how is the land constrained and what might be the best land use on the area. So we do look at that kinds of information to determine where those lines are.
I figured you did, and I looked at it when I saw the open space, because I know that a lot of the things that might be, when you do a broad plan, you just kind of, carve it out. But then we have hillside ordinances, which would impact the open space, because you can't build above it. So anyway, I just wanted to ask that question, see where we were technology, because it looked, doing it on foot, so to speak, or had to be really painstaking and very dedicated. I mean, so, nice job.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay. With that, thank you, Lori. Good report. Next up is the call to the public. Public members here? Nothing. Okay, updates from staff.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, just a couple items. You can see on the screen when our next meetings are. October 18th will be in the council chambers. And then, as Lori mentioned, November 1st, that'll be the off-site meetings. We'll be at Rio Vista Recreation Center. And then the second item, just to let the commission know, we do have one vacant alternate spot. The subcommittee for boards and commissions has made a recommendation. That recommendation will go forward to the next council meeting. So I would imagine by that November 1st date, we will have our alternate and final commissioner seated.
Excellent. Okay. Any updates from the commission? All right, seeing none, we'll call the meeting adjourned.